Hey everyone! So a couple of weeks ago I was accepted into Sheridan's Honors Bachelor of Animation program for the graduating class of 2025, which I am still pinching myself over. This was my second year applying. I was rejected last year with a 68%, which was rough. Then did a load of practicing as well as a year of art fundamentals at Sheridan and tutoring, which I will get into later in the video. And then was accepted this year with a 94%. So I'm super thrilled, really proud of my improvement and how much my work has grown and changed throughout the year. This year, the cutoff for domestic students was 89% and the international cutoff was 95%, which is absolutely crazy. But I wanted to make this video because of how extremely helpful portfolio videos were for me in my own portfolio process. And I wanted to share my improvement process and resources I use to help improve my skills in hopes that it will help others. So this video is going to be split into two chunks. The first part will be just my accepted portfolio and a bit of commentary on each part, and the second part will be comparing my rejected 2020 portfolio to my current 2021 accepted one, as well as talking about my improvement process, resources I've used, and tips I have. If you like this video, please consider following my Instagram at SophieCorpArt, and I will link that down below, or subscribing to this channel. So without further ado, here's my score sheet and portfolio. So this year we had to do 4 life drawings, 2 short poses from 1 to 3 minutes that focus more on gesture and movement, and 2 long poses from 5 to 20 minutes that focus more on structure and anatomy. All 4 drawings were done with Conte on newsprint paper. Life drawing was definitely my weakest section of my portfolio. I got a 7 out of 10 on this section, which I wasn't really surprised about. I definitely spent the least amount of time doing life drawing. It wasn't my favorite thing to do, so I ended up putting most of my energy into other portfolio categories. Don't do that. You should definitely put more focus on the practice for this section specifically, because life drawing takes a super long time to get the hang of. Despite this, though, I still improved from last year's, so that's good. For my short poses, I did a 2-minute pose and a 3-minute pose, and for my long poses, I did 2 6-minute poses. I tried to focus on structure and gesture, however, line quality needs work, and I feel like the proportions are a bit off on both short poses and long poses. I make my heads too big often, but something to improve on for the future. This year, we were asked to do 2 hand drawings, one that is anticipating the action and one that is carrying out the action. The action this year was tossing a small object, like a dice or a coin, down onto a surface, either gently or with force. I got an 8 out of 10 on this section, which I'm not upset about. The hand drawings were the last pieces I created for my portfolio, so I only did 1 version of each. Both were done traditionally with blue pencil, and I tried to focus on the interior structure of the hands, as well as proportions, line quality, and dynamic poses. I also tried to show both the back side and palm side of the hand. I think I lost 2 points because my anticipating action was a little stiff. It definitely could have been more exaggerated. And I also think the hand action was a little odd. I'm not sure how well the 2 actions flowed together. Overall, though, I'm not too upset with how they turned out. I got a 15 out of 15 on this section, and I am so happy with how it turned out. I did this section digitally, and this was the piece that I probably spent the longest on. I started it right off the bat in November, ended up completely changing the design about 3 weeks in, and then basically worked on it on and off up until the beginning of February. So I'm really happy that I received full marks. The instructions were the same as they usually are, which is pick an original character and rotate it in 4 positions. So front view, 3/4 front view, side view, and 3/4 back view. For this section, I really tried to focus on the overall design of the character, so not too complicated, and also portraying a certain amount of story. I also tried to show the interior structure of the character in all 4 poses to show that I understand how my character rotates. I started by rotating the larger aspects of the character first, and then went through with the details later. That way, you can make sure everything is consistent before going in with even more elements. I also tried to include as much line quality as possible, with darker lines in places and lighter, thinner lines in others. Ah yes, short animation. I got a 15 out of 15 on this section, which I am very happy with. I did the entire animation in Procreate with the animation feature, which I would not really recommend. It was pretty time consuming to clean up and go through the frames, and would get really frustrating sometimes. However, it still worked better than I thought it would, and it worked well enough to get it to be where it needed to be, so that's good. This section was super helpful to have a tutor for, especially if you don't completely understand or know all the elements needed for the animation, like proper timing and spacing. I tried to focus on some of the animation principles, like squash and stretch, and also tried to keep a consistent volume throughout. I thought it would be fun to animate the character doing something recognizable to help make it more original, so I had it playing hopscotch. Storyboard. This year they really shook things up a bit and changed the marking of the storyboard to be out of 20 points instead of 25. That was a huge win in my opinion, especially because in the past, if you marked really low on your storyboard, that was usually the kiss of death for your portfolio, which was what happened to me last year. That being said, it's still the section that weighs heaviest on the portfolio, and is one that can still be a hit or miss regardless. This year, the character they gave us to use was the possum. I got a 19 out of 20 on my storyboard, which I am super happy with. I was really nervous about this section, as I got a couple of critiques saying that the camera didn't move around enough, and then the last 2 shots were too similar. Thankfully, they seemed to like it though, and I only lost 1 point. For my storyboard, I tried to show a variety of shots, with a long shot, close-up shot, mid-shot, and a shot from the ground looking up. I also made sure to keep the character on model, that's super important, and tried to have my shots follow the 180 rule, which means not having the camera completely change sides every frame and allows the shots to flow well together. Readability is also really important. You should be able to tell what is happening in the frames without needing words or explanation. I also tried to show exaggeration in the possum's actions, and to have different facial expressions in every single shot. I think I lost a point for either the background, which probably could have been more consistent, the fact that the 3rd and 4th shots are pretty similar, or possibly the fact that there was a lot of extra space above possum in the 4th frame. Overall though, I am super happy with the mark. I got a 15 out of 15 on this section, which I am very happy about. I love doing layouts, and it was one of my favorite parts to do in the portfolio. This year, they asked us to do 2 layouts, 1 interior and 1 outdoor environment, both with at least 1 character in it. For my layouts, I did them both traditionally with blue pencil, used a long yardstick ruler to check perspective, then scanned them and used Procreate to clean up and add the character. My interior layout was based off of an oceanside tackle shop, so I tried to add lots of props and objects that would help give off the nautical appearance. I looked up a bunch of resources to help with the props, and I also included a character that fit well with the environment too. For my outdoor layout, I based it off of a forest cabin in the woods environment, so it was more stylized nature feel, but still had natural elements and multiple planes to help show distance. The character I included also worked well with and interacted with the environment, and then both layouts had darker lines for the closer objects and lighter lines for the objects farther away to help show distance, as well as open planes for the characters to move around with and interact with their environment. Both were also relatively evenly balanced, and one side wasn't really busier than the other. And last but not least, personal work. So this section is where you are able to show off your skills and techniques for drawing, painting, character design, sketchbook, 3D, etc., and set yourself apart from the other thousands of applicants. This year, this section was out of 15 points instead of 10, like it was last year, so you can now submit 5 to 7 pieces of personal work instead of only 5 like last year. This was a pretty great change, as it gives you more opportunities to show what you're capable of. For this section, I scored a 15 out of 15, which I am super happy with. I submitted 5 pieces, which was the minimum you could submit. However, 4 of these pieces were PDF submissions, which meant that I was able to group art that worked best together in one PDF file to help with organization. For everything I submitted, I tried to think of what you would include if you were applying for an animation job, and leave things out like life drawing and lots of realism. For the first submission, I submitted a layout compilation PDF, which was basically a combination of layouts I had done for my rejected portfolio last year and new ones I had created throughout the past year. I don't really think that any of the layouts were particularly strong enough to be its own submission, which was why I grouped them together into one PDF submission. For the second submission, I submitted a character lineup PDF. One that was line work focused and one that had the basic character colors. I had done some research previously into how to make a strong character lineup, and wanted to include things like having different sized characters together, lots of different exaggerated poses, lots of different personalities, etc., and made sure to use these suggestions in my own lineup for the portfolio. For the third submission, I submitted a character exploration notebook PDF, which was basically a collection of 2 characters from one story, so some of their expressions, some of their props that they use, and some of the colors that I thought would be used for their design. I compiled the 2 explorations into a sort of a digital scrapbook-like design, so when you would look through it, it gives off a scrapbook vibe, and I thought that was a creative way to compile a character exploration. For my fourth submission, I submitted a digital and traditional sketchbook compilation PDF, which is basically some digital and traditional sketches that I compiled and fit together in small categories to make a sketchbook-like design for them to look through. So I tried to submit a range of different mediums and different topics, like a digital painting and traditional watercolor observation sketches to show some understanding of painting and color, as well as pencil observation sketches and process work from the layout section. For my fifth and last submission, I created a short animatic roughly about a couple days before I submitted. So this animatic is super rough and kind of rushed, but I wanted to create it to show some of my interest in storyboarding. And that's my full accepted Sheridan Animation 2021 portfolio. So please feel free to ask me any questions, either down below in the comments or DM me on my Instagram, and I'll try my best to answer them. Now for the second part of the video. So I'll be comparing my accepted 2021 portfolio to my rejected portfolio from last year, as well as talking about my improvement process over the last year, resources I used, and tips I have. So after being rejected with a 68% last year, I ended up doing a couple of things. One was Sheridan's Art Fundamentals program from September 2020 to April 2021. Another was portfolio tutoring. And the rest was basically everyday practice, sketching, drawing characters, making personal work, etc. I didn't have the opportunity to be able to go to Animation Portfolio Workshop in Toronto, as well as with COVID, it kind of made it difficult to find another animation portfolio prep place, so I ended up with Art Fundamentals. So Sheridan's Art Fundamentals program, for people who don't know, is basically a one-year certificate program at Sheridan that focuses on helping you build a general art portfolio and improving your fundamental art skills. For me this year, the entire program was actually online and through Zoom because of COVID. Now, for me personally and my own experience, I'm not a huge fan of Art Fundamentals in terms of building up an animation portfolio, since the program isn't really geared towards that specifically. It mostly focuses on general art skills like perspective work, working with clay and sculpting, color theory and painting, and 2D graphic design, to name a few. But you're not going to be learning anything about storyboarding, animating, creating characters, or animation layouts, which are all things that the portfolio does rely heavily on. However, you do learn life drawing, which is a requirement in the portfolio, and I personally found very helpful, even though it was only online through Zoom format, so not in person. One thing I will say is that the Fundamentals program is designed knowing that most students will be busy creating their portfolios, so they don't cram the homework during the crucial months leading up to the portfolio deadlines, which I thought was really, really helpful. And it definitely allows you to put as much focus as possible onto building your portfolio. The profs were also really, really nice and always open to look over your portfolio and help you if you reached out. And honestly, despite how difficult and unfortunate the situation was with COVID and having to do everything online, I thought they did a great job on the most part with the online organization and keeping everything flowing well. I think it ultimately really depends on what your skill level is going into the program and what your focus is too. Even though it doesn't focus specifically on the things that you'll need for the animation portfolio, it does focus on some fundamentals that you can benefit from. And I think either way, if you were to take Art Fundamentals in prep for applying to Sheridan Animation, you would likely still need a tutor or a portfolio building workshop that focuses specifically on the animation portfolio. And that leads me into tutoring. I honestly felt like this was the aspect that was one of the most beneficial parts to my portfolio prep and helped not only with improvement, but with pointing out issues that I may not have noticed on my own. So from about November to February, I had 4 tutors, all of which were already in Sheridan's animation program, so they had all done their own portfolios for Sheridan Animation in the last couple of years and obviously have been accepted. I had 4 tutors because I wanted to make sure I got opinions and feedback from multiple different people instead of relying on the opinions of just one person, which is something I would recommend doing. I had 1 tutor, a wonderful person named Apollo, who is in their 2nd year currently, for basically every week from December to the beginning of February, as well as alternating between another 2nd year named Ishan, who was very helpful for animation, and a 1st year named Julianne, who was very helpful. And then I also did one section close to the beginning of February with a second year named Kaz, who was just super helpful too, and gave lots of great feedback. I will link all of their Instagram accounts in my description so you can check out their fantastic work. Okay, so portfolio comparison. So this is the score sheet from my rejected 2020 animation portfolio, and this is my score sheet for my accepted 2021 animation portfolio. So some pretty big jumps, specifically in the character rotation, animation, and storyboard sections. So first off is figure drawing. I went from a 5 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10, and even though a 7 out of 10 still isn't that great, I still think there was a big jump in last year. In last year's portfolio, all the poses were really stiff, so there wasn't much gesture or movement, especially with the short poses. That's a really important thing to have. There was also no structure and basically no anatomy, which is really important to have in all poses, but especially in the longer ones. In last year's poses, most of the limbs especially didn't show structure, and the head was not very three-dimensional. It also really gave off a feel of the figures being outlined, which is definitely something you want to avoid. Most of the practice and improvement the past year was definitely thanks to the life drawing class in Art Fundamentals, as they helped you break down the anatomy and structure, how to exaggerate your poses, and learn how to work on your line quality. Figure drawing, design and invention by Michael Hampton was also a helpful resource that I used to look into anatomy breakdown. Next up is hand drawings. So I went from a 7 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10, so not really a huge jump. However, there are still some noticeable improvements and things I'd like to point out between the two. In last year's poses, they weren't very dynamic, which means that the actions weren't super exaggerated. Both actions were also from a side view, which apparently they don't like, as it's not super interesting. And there also wasn't really any real structure in last year's poses. They look kind of flat, not very three-dimensional. And I also didn't show all of the fingers in the first pose. What I found really helpful for the improvement of my hand drawings this year was Proko's hand drawing YouTube videos, which I would definitely recommend. They help break down the proportions and structure, and I will link those in the description below. On to character rotation. So I went from a 10 out of 15 to a 15 out of 15, so big jump. And I'm probably most proud with that improvement. When I first started my rejected 2020 portfolio, I honestly had not much experience drawing people or characters, especially full body drawings. I was really intimidated by drawing people and characters, and usually only drew heads or none at all. So that's a really bad idea, as when I went to things like the character rotation, I really struggled. Some big things I would point out about the rejected character rotation would be that the character design was really not great. The face specifically wasn't very three-dimensional, and kind of looked off. Many of the details also had some large inconsistencies, and there wasn't any real internal structure. The feet also changed size throughout, and they were pretty inconsistent volume-wise. Line quality also wasn't that great because I had actually done it digitally and then printed it out and traced it because I thought that they really wanted to see traditional, but honestly I don't think they really care as long as the line quality is there. You can see with my new character rotation, all volumes are more or less consistent, feet rotate correctly and don't change volume. I think the large amount of improvement in only the last year was simply from practice. I basically drew characters every single day from when I was rejected in March 2020 to now. I also found this one video about character design, good versus bad character design, tips and tricks, very helpful in terms of learning how to make a character lineup, which I did end up making one in my personal work for this year's accepted portfolio, as well as other helpful character design info that I have incorporated into my characters now. I will link that video in the description box below. Okay, so short animation. I went from an 11 out of 15 to a 15 out of 15, so another pretty big jump. I wouldn't say this was something I practiced so much during the past year, but more so something that I learned to do properly during the portfolio in December, January. So tutoring was really, really helpful for this portion, as I learned things about animation that I had no idea about before, and that made a huge difference. I also had a friend who was studying animation at Conestoga College's animation program, and she was also super helpful sharing some of the things she's learned. With my rejected animation, the volume changes a lot. It's not really consistent at all, and I think that was the biggest issue. Even though there was squash and stretch, I think there was too much exaggeration, and the volume and size of the juice box kind of changed too much. There also may have been too many things going on as well, as I was kind of trying to show too many actions in only the short amount of time that we were allowed to do for animation. And in my animation from this year, the volume is consistent more or less. There were no huge size inconsistencies, a good amount of exaggeration, and only one strong action. And finally, my storyboard. So this is one of the biggest improvements, as I went from a 13 out of 25 last year to a 19 out of 20 this year. So a pretty big jump. Even though I'm not really 100% sure as to why I got such a low mark on my storyboard last year, I can still point out things that definitely would have cost me marks and parts that could easily have been improved. With my rejected storyboard, none of the shots have the full body of the possum, which I think definitely cost me marks, as I think they want to see that you understand how to draw the character they gave you, and hiding parts of the character, especially in every frame, doesn't help. I also think that the poses weren't as exaggerated as they could be. The line quality wasn't really all that great either. It was really thin and didn't vary so much between lighter and heavier lines. I also think that the shots could have been more exaggerated and varied, because even though there was some variation, the camera didn't move around that much and Possum basically stays the same size throughout. As well, the first shot has Possum completely in the dead center, and apparently one of the storyboard professors absolutely hates shots like that, so it's probably best to avoid dead center shots if you can. For improvement in the past year, I would say practicing drawing characters really helped, because when it came to drawing Possum again the following year, I found it much easier to draw him properly, to pose him, and to draw expressions for him. Tutoring was also very helpful for this category, as I got lots of help on shots, posing, and exaggerating the possum, etc. Ultimately though, I still don't think anyone really knows how they mark the storyboards, so the more research and practice you do, and the more feedback you get on your storyboard, the better. So I'm not going to be comparing my layouts or my personal work, as there wasn't really a huge improvement between the two. And that's it. Sorry this video is so long. There was a lot of information that I wanted to share and things to say, but if you have any questions at all about any of it, or anything that I maybe didn't touch upon, please feel free to ask them in the comments below, or DM me on my Instagram, and I'll try my best to answer. I really hope this helps other applicants in the future, and I wish everyone applying the best of luck. Thanks, guys.